this is a story of great tragedy and triumph.
The logging of the old-growth redwoods between 1850 and 1999 along the north coast was a tremendous tragedy. However, efforts from environmentalists triumphantly prevailed in permanently protecting the remaining redwoods.
Indeed, the Latin name for coast redwoods is Sequoia sempervirens, which means ever-living. Not only can coast redwoods live for 2,000 years, but they've also earned the title of the world's tallest tree. Many tower over 300 feet to the sky, similar in height to the Statue of Liberty. Some of the largest redwoods are 30 feet in diameter and are wide enough to drive your car through. But perhaps more impressive, according to George MacDonald, is the entrancing beauty and tranquility that pervade the forest, the feelings of peace, awe, and reverence that it inspires.
I'm Julie Clark, and I'm the park ranger for the Headwaters Forest Reserve under the Bureau of Land Management. People really like those old trees. I mean, there's less than 3% or 5% protected in California of what was left before 1850s when logging really began. And so these 1,000 to 2,000-year-old trees are priceless for our future generations.
The Native Americans living among the old-growth redwoods had little effect on the forest. They did some logging with primitive tools and heated stones, but the wind and rain took more trees than they did. They used the redwoods to build their houses and canoes. The beginning of the gold rush was when the redwoods really began to feel the hand of man. When gold didn't bring fortune, early settlers looked to the redwood trees. They became known as redwood gold. As François Leidet said, "The wood has many of the same properties as the tree, and as a result, the very qualities that protected the tree in the forest condemned it to destruction by man." This is true because redwood is rot, fire, and insect resistant and can be made into many things. Its wood is as beautiful as the tree itself. As John Muir famously said, "As timber, the redwood is too good to live." Early logging of the redwoods proved no easy task. It took as much as 3 days to fell a redwood with an axe and a crosscut saw. The invention of the dolbear donkey revolutionized logging by being able to quickly move down to trees to sawmills. By the 20th century, logging was becoming much more efficient. Gas-powered chainsaws replaced hand saws. Tractors replaced the dolbear donkey. Logging trucks replaced the railroads. Technology made even remote stands of old-growth redwoods accessible. By the 1960s, there was only a mere 15% of virgin redwoods still standing. If logging kept up this rate, the redwoods would be gone forever. Luckily, some people saw the great tragedy coming and had a mind to prevent it.
In 1917, 3 important conservationists, John Merriam, Madison Grant, and Fairfield Osborne, were invited by the National Parks Director, Stephen Mather, to drive through a logging site, and the devastation that they saw horrified them. So many old-growth redwoods that were once beautiful living trees were being destroyed. What they saw inspired them to save the remaining redwoods. In 1918, they brought together the first people of Save the Redwoods League and started purchasing many ancient old-growth stands. When they presented in Eureka 1919, there were many local people who attended the meeting. This was because local women's groups were very active in telling people what terrible things were happening to the redwoods. They were related to the loggers, so they saw firsthand how quickly the trees were being cut down. Logging was their livelihood, so they didn't try to actively stop it at first, but they did want to create redwood parks. In 1908, the Humboldt County Federation of Women's Clubs sent a petition to President Theodore Roosevelt asking for a national redwood park. More than 2,000 school children signed the petition. President Roosevelt responded that he was very anxious to help. The day after the conservationists presented, a women's meeting was held, and they made a new club called the Women Save the Redwoods League. They were important members of the Humboldt County Society, and they put themselves in front of the loggers, their family and friends, who would never hurt them. They saved a 103-acre grove, which you can visit today along the Avenue of the Giants. Save the Redwoods League, with support from the women, went on to save Richardson Grove in 1922 and more than 200,000 acres. They created more than 66 redwood parks, protecting most of the old-growth redwoods that are still on Earth. The Pacific Lumber Company was one of the best companies in the country because they were economically stable and maintained the ecosystem of the forest. They didn't clear cut and left 30 to 50% of their trees still standing. They maintained the stability of the forest and left room for new growth. They didn't take away their workers' jobs even when there wasn't enough money, and they put a lot of money into their workers' retirement funds. Because of the way they cut trees but left a lot standing, they had a lot of valuable old-growth redwoods remaining. In 1985, Charles Hurwitz saw he could make a whole lot of money taking over the company. He destroyed the pension fund and doubled the rate of logging to pay off the junk bonds and loans he used to take over the company.
And in 1986, unfortunately, some of their stock was available for a takeover, a hostile takeover, and I'm not sure they even realized it, but Charles Hurwitz basically called Woody Murphy in 1986 and said, I own your company. And he did this with junk bonds, and so he was actually kind of this Texas corporate tycoon that was able to borrow money with retirement funds and that sort of thing, and then buy all the stocks for Pacific Lumber. Well, of course, he wanted his money back, and so he kind of ordered round-the-clock logging to where they were cutting all of the a lot of the old-growth forests that the Murphy family had in perpetuity, and so because of this, they were breaking a lot of environmental laws and doing things illegally.
Between 1987 and 1999, thousands of people came together to try to save the last large stands of old-growth redwoods from being clear-cut by Pacific Lumber Logging Company, which was now under the ownership of Charles Hurwitz. The early members of the Northern Californians chapter of Earth First became sick of watching the timber companies cut tree after tree while they waited for the slow core process to permanently protect the old-growth redwoods. While the Environmental Protection Information Center filed lawsuit after lawsuit against Pacific Lumber, Earth First began to use on-the-ground tactics such as trespassing tree sits and human blockades in active logging sites. Some people even dangerously laid their bodies on the road in front of oncoming timber trucks. This was all to bring the logging to a quicker halt than the legal court process could. In 1990, environmentalists organized a huge protest rally known as Redwood Summer to bring national attention to the urgent matter of protecting the remaining few stands of old-growth redwood. Protests occurred nearly every summer after, with the largest in 1996. 6,000 people showed up to a protest and over 1,000 were arrested. This remains the largest act of civil disobedience in the history of forest preservation. In 1997, Julia Butterfly Hill, an inspiring conservationist, climbed the old-growth redwood known as Luna. Julia Hill was determined to save Luna from the loggers and the Maxam Company, but to do that, it took her 2 years of patience and zero contact with the ground. Luna was her home, along with a plywood platform and a tarp. Julia represented the amount of dedication and sacrifice the environmentalists were giving to save the trees. It turns out that 2 birds, the marbled murrelet and the northern spotted owl, played a huge role in saving the largest remaining unprotected stand of old-growth redwoods known as Headwaters Forest. Both birds were listed as threatened in the Endangered Species Act because of the dwindling availability of nesting sites in the old-growth redwoods. The conservationists saw this and used the Endangered Species Act to stop the logging companies from threatening the endangered species habitat, which was illegal. As a result, in 1999, Headwaters Forest was purchased from Charles Hurwitz for $480 million, and it triumphantly became public land.
It's a tragedy that 95% of the old-growth coastal redwoods are gone forever. However, it is a triumph that the rest have been saved. So many people risk their lives so that our generation and all the generations to come can enjoy the redwoods that are still standing. Unlike most of the things the public spends money on, parks only get more valuable over time. It's a triumph to put the old-growth redwoods in the hands of the public, so for the future we can continue to protect and enjoy them.